the Speaker of the National Assembly, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister. And now I would like to ask the permission of the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the National Assembly to violate the protocol, because I should properly address the distinguished members of both the Senate and the National Assembly. But it was said, I was 17 years member of Parliament in my country. And this was the function that I exercised for a larger period in my life. And so, with your permission, I would like to address the distinguished members by simply saying, dear colleagues. Distinguished guests, Dumelang. I wish to begin by expressing my deepest gratitude to His Majesty, King Letsie III, and to the people of Lesotho for your warm welcome. I'm honored to be in the Kingdom of Lesotho more than 20 years after the visit of my dear friend and predecessor, Kofi Annan. And I'm honored to address this Parliament as you celebrate the bicentenary of the Basotho nation. 2 centuries ago, as profound upheaval was reshaping Southern Africa, King Moshoeshoe Shoe charted a revolutionary path. While others chose conflict, he embraced dialogue. When faced with hostility, he responded with wisdom and courage. His vision transcended the challenges of his time, transforming this great land into a sanctuary of peace through diplomatic and moral courage. By welcoming displaced communities and building bridges across divides, he showed the world how diversity can strengthen the fabric of nationhood. The principles he embodied, human dignity, diplomacy, and the courage to embrace differences lie at the heart of our shared aspirations at the United Nations. Honorable members, Lesotho's partnership with the United Nations began even before your independence. In 1963, the General Assembly adopted a landmark resolution that warned against any attempt to annex or encroach upon the territorial integrity of Basotho land. That principle stand of the international community reaffirmed your inalienable right to self-determination and independence. And 3 years later, Lesotho joined the United Nations as a sovereign state. Since then, you have been an unwavering voice for peace, honoring King Moshoeshoe's legacy of dialogue and solidarity. Your consistent support for multilateral solutions shows that the nation's true strength lies in its principles. For all these reasons, I'm especially honored to convey a message not only to the people of Lesotho, but to Africa and indeed the world. A message of solidarity and justice for this great continent. We all know Africa's enormous potential, but let's be clear, deep injustices are denying Africa's rightful place on the world stage. These injustices share a common root, a global system designed without African voices, maintained without African participation, and perpetuated despite African protests. When a continent that is home to nearly a fifth of humanity remains systematically excluded from global decision-making, we must call this what it is, a relic of colonialism that has no place in today's world. Start with the UN Security Council. Nearly 80 years after its creation, Africa still awaits even a single permanent seat. This hurts Africa, But it also hurts the Council, its effectiveness, its legitimacy, and its credibility. From Sudan to the Sahel, conflicts rage and communities suffer. And these crises demand not just global attention, they demand African leadership. Yet Africa has no permanent voice when the world decides on matters of war and peace in Africa through the Security Council. That is unacceptable and it must change. But we must also act to correct injustices across many other fronts. First, financial justice. The current international financial system is outdated, dysfunctional, and unfair to Africa and beyond. It was built for the world of 1945, not for the 21st century. The current system not only reflects historical injustices, it exacerbates them. Today, so many countries across Africa must choose between servicing debt and realizing their people's rights and needs. The legitimate development aspirations are subject to credit ratings that do not reflect the enormous potential of the African continent. African nations pay up to 8 times more for borrowing than developed countries. So for every dollar that a country like Lesotho spends on education or infrastructure, disproportionate sums are drained away in interest payments, with 11% of your budget going into debt servicing. It's time to change it. And the Pact for the Future, adopted by the General Assembly in September, charts a new course. It calls for reforming and boosting the lending capacity of multilateral development banks. It calls for an SDG stimulus plan of $500 billion a year for developing countries, and it calls for comprehensive debt relief. Until now, the framework created by the G20 has been applied to 4 countries. There are so many more that need debt relief, and I would say that deserve debt relief because they are not responsible for the conditions that led to the high levels of debt that they face. Africa's perspective and leadership must guide these reforms to help create a system that serves all countries, not just the privileged few. And Lesotho has an important voice in advocating for these changes, a voice rooted in its proud history of resilience and justice. Second, climate justice. Climate change is destroying our planet, from the snow-capped peaks of the Maluti Mountains to the sinking islands of the Pacific. Rising temperatures, extreme weather, and soil erosion are threatening agricultural productivity and food security. Families are grappling with food shortages, water scarcity, and the loss of livelihoods. The continent accounts for less than 4% of global carbon emissions, but suffers from some of the most devastating climate impacts. The environmental damage and lost productivity cost African economies billions each year, yet you receive only a fraction of global climate finance. In short, you are paying twice for a crisis that you did not cause, and this is profoundly unfair. Africa must not be forced to choose between economic development and climate action. The continent's vast renewable energy potential, from solar to wind to hydropower, and Lesotho is a fantastic example of that potential, remains largely untapped, while 600 million Africans still lack access to electricity. A just transition means investing in renewable technologies, providing concessional finance for green investments, and supporting the transfer of knowledge and technologies. And no other country would use better these instruments than Lesotho. You have demonstrated it in the past. I'm sure you'll do it in the future. We need solidarity and justice in action, not just words. The Loss and Damage Fund must be operationalized swiftly and funded generously by those most responsible for climate destruction. And allow me to tell you a true story. The Loss and Damage Fund was a strong demand of developing countries. So much loss and damage is taking place in the world. And it is fair that those that have a responsibility about that loss and damage contribute to the response that is needed to avoid loss and to correct the causes of damage. Now, when the Loss and Damage Fund was created, there was a number of countries that have pledged support to the Loss and Damage Fund. And we could imagine, when one sees the dimension of loss and damage in the world, that it would be a massive amount of money. Now, the truth is, the amount pledged when the Loss and Damage Fund was created is exactly corresponding to the sum of the 10 salaries, annual salaries of the 10 most well-paid footballers in the world. And we can see that we are far from having a serious commitment to the Loss and Damage Fund, and this must be quickly corrected. Developed countries must meet their commitment to double adaptation finance to at least $40 billion a year by next year and deliver the promised $300 billion annually for climate finance that were approved now in the last COP. Landlocked and least developed countries like yours are especially vulnerable, and they require special support and easier access to finance and technology. We cannot treat the same way a least developed landlocked country as we treat a middle-income country, even if the middle-income country still has a number of difficulties. So it's clear that Lesotho requires special support and easier access to finance and technology. And we must also enhance regional cooperation for climate-resilient development. The Lesotho Islands Water Project is a perfect example, and I look forward to visiting the Katse Dam tomorrow. Honourable members, Justice for Africa also means justice and opportunities for all Africans. By respecting, protecting, and promoting human rights, by harnessing the energy, innovation, and aspirations of the world's youngest population, including Lesotho, you have an enormous potential in your young people. But this economic global system must create the conditions for jobs to be available for that group of young people that is the future richness of your country. 2/3 of your population are under the age of 30. That is an enormous potential, but it needs to be properly invested. And for that, international support is necessary. On the other hand, by confronting health challenges with renewed determination, particularly HIV/AIDS, which continues to affect too many families in Lesotho and across the continent, by pursuing disability inclusion, and by advancing gender equality, no society can thrive with half of its population held back. Eliminating gender-based violence, child marriages, closing the education gap, offering equal opportunities are not just moral imperatives, they are essential for sustainable development in all countries in the continent and in the world. And gender equality is fundamentally a question of power and a means of redefining and transforming power that will yield benefits for all. We need bold systemic change, including through affirmative measures such as quotas, to ensure women have a voice and can meaningfully participate in decision-making. And the United Nations is your partner in the journey towards sustainable and inclusive development. Distinguished members of Parliament, your role transcends these chambers. You represent the hopes and aspirations of all Basotho people. Through your legislative power, you can shape a prosperous and equitable future. Invest in clean energy and climate resilience. Advance economic transformation to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. champion good governance, transparency, and accountability, and leave no one behind, including women and girls, young people, and persons with disabilities. Your parliamentary diplomacy serves as a bridge connecting Lesotho's aspiration with regional and global partnerships. Excellencies, your history as a nation is one of courage and perseverance. Your rich natural resources, your location at the heart of Southern Africa, and your commitment to sustainable development put you in a unique position. As you celebrate your bicentenary, you have the chance to build a new legacy for future generations. And in doing so, Lesotho is not alone. Across the continent, nations are rising, drawing strength from their history, their culture, and their shared aspirations. Together, Africa is crafting a vision of transformation built on the foundations of justice and solidarity. This is your moment to show the world that from the challenges of today, a new era of hope and equality can be born. As you say in Sesotho, Mohale Otsoa Maroleng, heroes emerge from the dust. May we find in this ancient wisdom the courage to face our shared future and forge a heroic response worthy of the people's aspirations. Kotso Pula Nala. Kea Leboa. Thank you.